Mr. Jacob Cooper, thank you for being here. Episode 3. I really appreciate you. I am told that you have an NDE story that you are willing to share with me, and I greatly appreciate you, man. I'm happy you're here.
Oh, a true honor to be your guest, and thank you for the good work that you're doing and spreading and elevating consciousness around the planet. Thank you.
Oh, man, no worries. I don't think of it like that, but I appreciate it. No problem.
hmm
Let's hear it, man. Without further ado, I'm gonna do what I always do. I want to be an audience member here. I'm gonna sit back, and just kind of give you your space.
Right on. Well, September of 1993, I was just the young age of 3 years old. I went to a playground with family friends. At the time, I had a condition otherwise known as whooping cough, otherwise known as pertussis, and I just completely suffocated when I was climbing up on a ladder going into a slide. All parts of my body, including my brain, were deprived of oxygen, so I wasn't able to breathe at all. So everything in my body just began to shut down, one unit at a time until my brain, I just felt it literally snap in half. This loud, cracking sound within my brain. And literally, I could feel my brain crack open. And that's when God in the spirit realm came in. And so it was at this moment in which I had a full crossing over euphoric near death experience in which I felt my soul go into a tunnel and ascend up, up towards infinite bliss and euphoria. And there was no limitations with how good I felt. I was able to see everything that was always inside of me and always inside of each one of us at all times. When I was in my NDE, I was able to see the palace of what was depicted to me as God. And when I looked at it, I saw angels around it, and it was just beautiful light shimmering from it. And it was so beautiful that I just had to shield myself from it. And it was so profound, but I knew it was representation of the eternal force of creation of life, the eternal source of it all, which some would call, in our terms, God or the universe, whatever terms you want to use. But it went beyond term, where to me it was just the centerpiece of all of creative life force. Moments later, I had an awareness of, what would I look like? What would my parents think? All those kind of things and all these questions that came to my mind in my near-death experience. And I had this consciousness that it's called the Christ consciousness on the other side, where I felt this high vibrational frequency, one of the highest possible frequencies on the other side, that came in my field of awareness, and it was very comforting. And in this moment, I saw that no matter what would happen to myself or my parents, that all is well, was well, will be well in the end. And so it didn't matter if I continued at this age or crossed over, that we would join and connect. Then moments later, I felt my body going down the slide of the playground, and I had people surrounding me. And when I was going down, I felt to my right side and my left side of me my two guardian angels or spirit guides. There was a male and female guide with me at this time. And I had such a beautiful reunion with my guides. I was able to know their names. They were the most beautiful beings you could possibly understand and imagine. But when seeing my guides, I felt, holy crap, they've been with me this whole time, but I haven't really been connected to them. I just had my blinders on and had this veil of forgetfulness that all these beings were around me at this time. And then my body was on the ground, and people tried to wake me up and see if I was okay, and I was not responding. But I did feel a form to the side of my body. And when I looked at all the people that I was with at the park in the playground at that day, I was able to see their guides and their angels and their, auric fields around them. And it just dawned on me at that moment that we are all this. And sometimes in this life we'll associate spirituality with, people who we think are religious or spiritual. But on the other side, that is who we are. We are all infinite, eternal, spiritual beings, no matter what. That's our core phyla. Moments later, I just started to see this infinite sea of angels that were just floating right in front of me, all around me. And versus the guides, where they were more adult and They had their own distinctive characteristics. These angels that I saw were very kind of uniformal, and they were very childlike. And while I was trying to look at them, I could see that they weren't really looking at me. They were just looking pure in this distance, looking straight, just sending healing, sending love, sending energy. But they were literally just a filter above this reality all around us, and they're around us at all times. Angels are all around us. If we just shift our vibration, if we shift our frequency, they are with us. An infinite amount of angels. Moments later, I began to see my own soul family, or soul pod as we call it, with which we incarnate through different lifetimes with. And, to me, these are just beings of the ray of God that we're all a part of. They're beings of light, beings that we vibrate to, on a similar basis, but we go way back throughout, dozens and hundreds of lifetimes with. And I was rejoiced to see them, although feeling a little bit embarrassed that I was um,
Coming out a
about to
little
go so
soon.
early.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like you have this big party to go to the military, and then like a week later, like, screw this, I'm not gonna,
Yeah.
go there. But that was not their perception. That was mine. Just to really clarify that
Hmm.
loved ones in spirit are connected to us all times, and they're so proud of us, no matter what. They are with us 100%. And time is over there is much different than over here. But then obviously I was not obviously, but I was posed a question, which was, would I stay on the other side, or would I continue this life? And I would say probably 70 to 75% of near-death experiencers are told, hey, there's other things to work on. It's not your time, and they're suggested to stay. To preface, the soul will never do anything that it doesn't want to do if it doesn't agree to do it, no matter what the suggestion is. The soul has to agree, to the suggestion. But in this moment, I was posed that question, and then slowly but surely, I just saw myself spanning the globe and having this big life review that not only included this lifetime, but it was able to have a life review of other different lifetimes and experiences. And the life review is really understanding your life through the eyes of another. For you and the other are not another, they're one and the same. We are indeed one. What you do to another, you indeed do to yourself. But there was a lot of parallels between one particular last lifetime and my near-death experience that I had that hopefully we could get into. But then I saw premonitions of myself doing this exact work, which is speaking in front of people, spreading the good word, spreading the message. And, I said, as beautiful as the other side truly is, I cannot turn down this opportunity to deliver this message and to be a part of this movement and to create a memory of heaven on earth, that people didn't have to die to wait to go to heaven or to get to heaven, but to recognize that heaven was always, is, was, will be right within the depths of your being. We can never leave it. In body, out of body, we're always connected to it, although we may forget that. And with that agreement, that decision, everything started to dissipate from my field of awareness. And, I slowly, the rest is kind of history, but I just had second doubts like, oh my Lord, what did I just do? I turned down the beauty of the other side. But my guides and angelic team really delivered the message that we indeed, as souls, have a blueprint, have a plan, have a soul's plan before we get here, and there's a greater intelligence that goes into that exceeds far more than our doubts, our anxieties, our own judgment. And it's important to have our thoughts really trust in the plan that those beings on the other side have. And with that agreement, I woke up on the hospital bed, rushed from the ambulance to the hospital, and the rest is history.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I have a lot of follow-up questions if you're okay with it.
Yeah, sure, please.
I actually want to dive into you set up like you called it a pod, right? It's and my understanding it's a group of people that you are close with, right? That you guys all basically go in, right? That's the idea is that you go and reincarnate together.
Hmm.
It Number one, how do you know that? Did it just all come to you at once? Like you just had this knowing inside you, like this is my team, this is my squad, this is
No,
we've done this many times, or how does that
it,
happen?
it was just it was just like knowing that you're on the other screen right in front of me,
Wow.
clear as crystal, that we've done this dance before. This wasn't
Okay.
just the first time. And I actually saw, a lot of people as well that I encountered in past lives that we had a pure connection with. But I would say we all are part of a quote unquote soul family, but there's more of it on a nuclear basis that you have, just kind of like your nuclear team. But in general, every being is a part of the soul tribe, but there's more of a nuclear
I got you. It's like
element to it.
friends,
Yeah.
kind of, right? Like let's say, uh, maybe in my this lifetime, I'm gonna come back as your son, and then maybe in this one, you're gonna be my dad, or or you're my mom, or
Mhm.
like, do you think we do things like that? Like we
Oh,
switch roles all the
one
time?
100%. If you do look at evidential case studies found at the University of Virginia Perceptual Studies,
Hmm.
they have tons of archives of past life, narratives and stories that are evidential, and even there are people in this life who connect with others who are still living and they've reincarnated and they connect with them. For instance, the Dalai Lama, I'll give an example. If you haven't watched 7 Years in Tibet with Brad Pitt, please do watch it. Great movie. But the Dalai Lama, in order for him as a young child, a young infant, to be chosen as a Dalai Lama, it had to be proven that he was a reincarnate of the last. And so they have to go through rigorous tests to prove that you indeed do have memories of yourself as that last Lama in order for you to continue that tradition. And so this, in the Western Hemisphere, it's a little bit kind of newer, but if you go to Eastern, practices and traditions, it's just really a part of their cultural experiences, 100%. But I do credit a gentleman by the name of Dr. Brian Weiss. If you haven't heard of him, Brian was a hard left brain Yale psychiatrist who was doing not past life regression, which I practice, by the way, but he was doing something called age regression therapy, in which he regressed a client back to one of their sources of their phobia. And it was found, Brian did not do this intentionally, but this client connected to a lifetime in which, they drowned in water, and she was able to pick up on so many people around Brian, and so a lot of people around Brian, and a lot of evidential mediumistic uh, points of evidence that she was able to have around him that just blew his mind, that he was a complete stranger in his own personal life to this person, but she knew things about him that no one knew, which predated the internet at the time. So again, that blew his mind, and he just got really interested in reincarnation. He wrote a book, I believe, in the late '80s or early '90s called um, Many Lives, Many Masters, which was a big best-selling book, and that really helped to give credibility to reincarnation from someone who had, a left brain clinical psychiatrist trained in Yale, to give credibility to these things. So I do credit a lot of his work in the Western Hemisphere to give us a voice of confidence that this isn't something woo-woo or something that is kind of hippie and out there, but rather this is something very evidential and academic and legitimized.
Yeah, very cool. That concept to me is so fun. I don't know why. I love it. I love the idea of like, I don't know, I'm very playful, I guess. So I love the idea of being like, okay, see who can wake up first. Like, or if there's anything like that. I don't know. Oh, and or gosh, there's probably some really hard lessons, or we all know, right? There's very hard lessons that you learn here, in this school
Yeah.
of life, and like wondering if like, hey, I'm gonna choose to be that lesson for you, right? And how actually it's a very intimate thing to do, right? Only someone who's really close to you would want to do that, like have a kid pass away or something, right? Something that's so hard for you here, and you're like,
Hmm.
your pod is like, you know what? I'm gonna be that for you, and like I don't know, it's just a very fascinating way to think about things. Um,
Yeah, well, you make a great point that yes, some things we go through are for our lessons, but also some things we go through are for others, to
mhm.
teach and to learn. So, yeah, 100%. And I think what's important in all this stuff is for, people to gather information, kind of like a courtroom, and what is deemed as legitimate, evidential, something that really strikes a chord in you, should be something that kind of sticks with you as something that passes versus something that isn't. But the key is now more than ever, evidence is building, and we're getting a lot of case studies and research on these things. And we're bridging academia, and science and spirituality to really provide a lot of credibility behind all this findings. So again, it doesn't have to be something that you yourself have to directly experience, but rather you could see the pointed evidence to this as a reality. But it does help to have that
Hmm.
direct experience and knowing of this, which is something that I do within my work, as a regressionist, where I, help people to really go back and access previous life memories so they could really understand who they are, why they're here, what are some of the tendencies, and most importantly, what is a little bit about of their soul's purpose, which is probably the biggest question that people have to ask is, who am I, why am I here? And, that question is, very limited, and a lot of it is based on social learning within this life. But,
Yeah.
our beings far transcend that, and so the answer to that has to come from a much deeper angle than just this one limited lifetime.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. Do you feel like there's one main mission usually, or is it a bunch of things? Like when you're mapping out your life, I also love that concept, by the way. I think that's not that it's a concept, but look, I'm fairly new to this. I think I'm in my sponge state. I love learning. I love like,
Well, that's a beautiful place to be in. You're very much in the growth mind,
hmm
which to me a lot of people will maybe get stale with their beliefs. And to me, what's life? Life has generativity, has newness. It
yeah,
creates anew, and that's a beautiful place to be in. And the Zen world, they call that the beginner's mindset, which is a place where you could really evolve and learn and grow, and not stay stagnant. So that's a credit to you. I love that. That's a great position to be in for certain.
yeah, I love it, man. It's been fun. How do you did you feel like you learned? Actually, let me rephrase it this way. So in that moment, right? Because you're very young, it kind
Hmm.
of all hit you at once. Like, oh wow, at least young in a human world sense, right? But do you, after that moment, do you feel like that change you? Meaning, like, did you start instantly like, wow, you remembered a lot, and then you, I guess, picked back up off where you
Hmm.
last, like, right? I mean, you left, probably had a bunch of lives prior. Now you're back here. You're young. You just had this incredible experience,
Hmm.
very difficult, but like, how did that change things for you? I mean, did it put you on a path
It,
instantly? Where,
immensely. It wasn't like I was talking to people about this, because again, it takes time
hmm
for what we know inside to be properly articulated, and still to this day, there's such a limited vernacular with the tools that we have. For instance, the light on the other side is much different than the light over here. The light over here is based on the rays of the sun, where the light on the other side is based on the light of God. So the
mm,
colors that we have are not comparative. You can't possibly equate the two. But yes, my life was drastically changed. From that moment on, I remember going back to preschool, and again, I don't remember too much other than these higher etherical experiences that went beyond my brain. But I remember just this sliver of light going into my brain while sitting in a classroom, and I was able to really have such a deepened connection to the other side, and I had so much information, premonitions, mediumistic experiences that occurred after this, which is quite common for people near-death experiencers, because there's such a shakeup in their brain chemistry and their consciousness that a lot of, oftentimes their gifts come to the surface, and it does change people. In addition to people who are maybe a midlife is, really been proven to impact their relationships, how they spend their times, their value systems, what they find to be meaningful, careers, all those things are really, totally rocked and changed.
yeah.
But for myself, it was a different, positionality, because I was just beginning this life, in
hmm
this body. So it was very different. But I would say it was not easy. It was not particularly enjoyable at
hmm
times. Because let me ask you, what does every kid want? Is just to fit in and to be
Oh
normal.
yeah, yeah, and that is
And
not normal.
right. And if you're connected to the other side, you're put on all these types of medications, and you're
hmm
trained to be in a world that falls in love with regurgitation versus imagination.
hmm
So it's like the spirit realm was not very embraced by academia, to say the least. Not in grade school, but more so college, absolutely. There's all types of perceptual studies and parapsychology departments, that have been booming, that are, inviting these things. But, grade school, not as much. Uh, but again, uh, absolutely totally changed. But I think the hardest thing was feeling very different, like I said, than my peers, and feeling, just I was called weird, teased, just people didn't know what to make of me.
Yeah.
for a period, and there was a time where I just looked at all these spirits around the room and looked to a classmate, and I was like, "Do you see what I'm seeing?" And they're
Mm.
like, "What the heck are you talking about?" And then in that moment, I was like, "Oh no!" I just feel just like that sinking feeling of feeling very alone. So I really kept within. And the greatest conversations that I had throughout my childhood were not with other people, but they were with the spirit realm. And I would often just try to like go to the bathroom just so I could talk and connect to the other side, and just because this life is kind of boring, but that interested me, and so that was a big part of it. But then there's a certain point, as I forget Charles Darwin would say, the greatest trait of any continuity of life here in the physical is adaptability, is flexibility. And so for myself, I had to learn something called radical acceptance, which does not mean that I like, agree, or think that it's fair, but I recognize this was the situation at hand, and I had to just really kind of integrate and almost kind of bury this as much as I can to fit in, because otherwise it just would have been too much. So to survive, I had to take that beach ball and put it under the water, but to thrive, I had to let it to come up at a certain point later in my life. And this started in my later teens and early 20s when I was really able to see this as a blessing rather than the curse. But it took me, almost 2 decades to do that, and it was not easy.
Oh, I'm sure it was not, Jacob. I'm sure it was not. Those were hard years as a kid, let alone having to go through something like that. So,
Right.
can I ask you why do you think um, why do you think some people have NDEs and some people don't? Like what? Like
It's a great
why
question.
do you think that happens?
Yeah, great question, Sigi. I think a lot of it has to do with the blueprint of the life plan. That has a lot to do with it. I think something as extreme as a near-death experience, I do believe, in the vast majority of cases, are charted with our guides, with our angel teams. There's a subjective reason for that. Soul to soul, I can't speak for all of them, but what I can do is say that near death experiences aren't just about you, they're more so for other people. And so I think end ears go through these experiences to share them with other people, and they are gifts. As Pablo Picasso said, the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of it is to give it your way, to give it away. And near-death experiences have to recognize that this isn't something to hold on to. That was never the purpose of it, but the purpose of it is to do what I'm doing and so many others doing right now, is to get it out there. But again, timing is everything, and you have to be careful with who you display your vulnerabilities to. For myself, I just knew that if I were to share this with people at a certain point in time, I would never be able to do what I'm doing. I would be quite ostracized, traumatized, put down, and gaslit, and you name it. So it just wasn't the right timing. It wasn't until I came to a point later in life that I was ready, but I only discuss it with certain people as I feel. Life is we're all kind of like swimming pools, and some people we allow in the shallow waters, and other people a little bit deeper, depending on what you can handle and your vantage point. And so for myself, I just kind of meet people where they're at, and if they're able to understand this with respect, then you allow them in. But it has to be something, what's the word, that you have to be selective of and discreet of, because some people could really try to ridicule, abuse. I mean, trust me, look at any of my interviews and look at the comments section. People just come at you. And again, that's a part of the course. Um, Again, for any near-death experiencer, I would recommend don't look at the comments. It's really, people will look at this at their own vantage point, and again, those that get it will understand it, and those that just don't won't. It has nothing to do with you, and that's one of the agreements of Don Miguel Ruiz, is to not take things personally. But really, I think mostly has to do with other people. But for myself, the near-death experience, I think, had a lot to do with my last incarnation, in which I crossed over due to suicide. And I don't criminalize it. I don't say completed suicide. I don't say commit suicide. I'm just rather commit suicide. Complete suicide is more the appropriate term. But what I don't do is to criminalize, because I think it's like, you don't criminalize, you don't commit a heart attack or brain cancer or something like that. It's something that you can succumb to due to the vast amount of pain on your system. We don't recognize, as so many people who do make that decision have so much strength in themselves to be living day in and day out with all that they have to bear, and to recognize they're not alone. There's help, there's support. On my books, I have tons of websites, and certainly working in the mental health field, I do recommend anyone who has a thought or a concern, to contact the local hotline and support system, and to remember you are not alone, and together you will be help, and you help to give a little bit of your hand, that person will help you stand. I've seen it time and time again. But when it comes to this decision, I saw that everything was caving onto me and there was no hope, there was no oxygen. And the same situation happened to me in my near-death experience. And so from completion we begin. But the differentiation between the two was I decided, instead of struggling against the pain, was to surrender to a greater strength that was always inside of me and around me. And so when I lost ability to breathe in a human sense, I was able to surrender to the breath of eternity, which we all have inside of us, which is something that moves through us in this body and will continue with us when we cross over and meet the creative force of eternal life, and the one who has bestowed the breath in each and every one of us, that goes within the body and beyond. And so once I surrendered to that, I knew that, that there was nothing that the bodily death could stop. No pain, no suffering, nothing. That's only temporary. And through surrendering to the power within, that is ability to transcend death. And if that could transcend death, what can it transcend that's put in this human experience?
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. I guess one more question for you, Mr. Jacob, if you're okay with that.
Sure.
Why do you think there's such variety in NDEs? Like, why do some people meet Buddha and some people meet Jesus?
Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting question. What I would say is most near-death experiences have very little to do with the prior life that you live in your NDE. So for people who, at times they do, but you see people who are traditionally atheistic, Jewish, Islamic, whatever it is, they experience totally different spiritual beings than they grew up within their own religious or non-religious context. But I think really a lot of it is vibrational frequency. Will attract certain deities and ascended masters based on our energy in a way that has to do on a soul level, not as much as at the human story level, but on a soul level. But we're talking about a multi-dimensional place. So multi-dimensional isn't one dimension. It's not just Buddha. It's not just Jesus. It's a whole buffet of all these things in a wide variety. That there's a magneticism to it. Each soul energy will vibrate to different things. But it's like whatever you want to have happen on the other side and access to, there's no limitation. We're not in the body. So, but I think how I see what you're saying, that there is a lot of variety in some of the narratives, because again, we have a lot of variety in our own lives, right? And so I think everyone has their own bliss. But for me, the legitimate near death experience, a full crossing over experience, they'll always come back with one similar uniformity, and that is God is love. God is love that
Yes.
I've never understood quite like that, quite like in my own life, no matter how much people loved me. God is the ultimate unconditional source of love, and God loves me for my inner being, not as much as my own outer doing. And that's it. That's what, has come back with. The rest, there's a lot of variety to, and I think it has to do with different soul levels and a lot of magneticism on a vibrational frequency level. But there is an eclectic experience on the other side because it is the multidimensional verse.
Well, thank you. I mean, I've never heard it answered that way before, so I appreciate that. Is there anything else you'd like to say, Mr. Jacob? I mean, before we go, any message you'd like to impart to the audience, although small?
We're growing and growing, and again, we just you just have no idea who's listening on these things.
Yeah.
I've done so many interviews where people that I least expected to listen to these things, got back to me, and I had no idea what they were going through. So the combination of A, they were the last people that I would think would turn into an NDE channel,
Mhm.
and B, I didn't know that these kind of things help them. So again, one person, a million people, the
Yeah.
message remains the
So true.
same,
So true.
that we are eternal, we cannot die, and like Sagi's doing right now is to be very curious. I always give the analogy of the explorers back in the day where they challenged the paradigm of their time, where they said, "Hey, I don't think the world is flat. I think it's round. I think there's more," and they had elasticity through exploration. and they were able to explore different lands. And I think for ourselves, I think the big thing is, yes, skepticism is very healthy. You don't want to buy into everything. You want to keep that skeptic, but to be exploratory, to be open-minded, and to maybe have the possibility of room for a different framework of beliefs to fit in, which is a big vulnerability too. But at times, life will present no other choice, where sometimes through crises and sometimes through difficulties, in order for us to thrive and survive, we must adapt. It's like that frog, in the water. It's either you sink or you just got to get out and try something new. So I would say to be curious and try to explore who and how you see yourself as within the nature of reality. Because, as Dr. Wayne Dyer would say, when you do change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And this world has such a relationship with what we view and how we believe and how we see reality. I will say that. And obviously, if anyone is interested in learning more about this information, I have authored two different published books, Life After Breath and The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. They're both available on, mostly Amazon through Kindle paperback as well as audio. And you could go visit my website at jacobLcooper.com if you are interested in learning more, connecting for your own personal sessions or more information about all these things that we talked about here within the podcast.
I love it, and I'm gonna link everything in the notes down below. Jacob Cooper, I appreciate you, man. Again, thank you so much for being here. I love that you ended it on being curious. I think that is something that my soul resonates with very much. So, uh, never be afraid to change your opinion. Always be curious. I love it. So, appreciate you, and love to have you back someday. So,
Thank
thank you.
you. Thank you for being curious and exploring different realms of consciousness. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. All right, Mr. Jacob. Cheers.